Good morning. You've heard of the Three Tenors Tour. This is the Three Geeks Tour. And we're looking forward to discussing a broad range of issues this morning. Brian, at the start of his talk, talked about what happens when the computing becomes so pervasive that we then have to decide why we need it. And I wanted to sort of begin us by thinking about print itself in a similar way. That is, all three of us do stuff in print and a lot of stuff that's not in print at this point. And we're making decisions about, when is something a book? When is something a blog post? When is something a film? When is something a multimedia project? And how do we think about those choices? And I told the conference organizers I'd say a little at the beginning about my two latest book projects and some of the choices we've made in this regard. And then I want to turn it over to the other two to talk about some of the decisions they're making along this regard. So Spreadable Media is out now and will be available, I think, for signing later today. Plug done. But it's a book about grassroots circulation and about what happens when people have the capacity to pass media along and where we're collectively making decisions about who and where and how to spread media. When we were writing the book, we faced a crisis because the publisher wanted us to cut out 70,000 words. We sort of got a little carried away in our writing of this book, and it ran a lot longer than we had anticipated. And we had to make a decision. Well, we were going to get rid of 70,000 words. We simply had to move them from one platform to another, from print to the web. And the decision we made is we had commissioned 40 essays that are about 2,000 words each from a variety of contributors responding to the argument of the book. And we said, let's put those in the web. Let's strongly encourage those to be spread and circulated because that's part of the logic of the book. And yet we will respond to them in the book itself. So there's a conversation going on in Spreadable Media between the printed book, which is written by Sam Ford, Joshua Green, and myself, and this larger body of material, which is already being reposted on blogs, that is being circulated by Twitter, so forth. That's part of this larger conversation. The second book I have coming out, Reading in a Participatory Culture, is for teachers from Teacher College Press. And it grows out of work we've been doing on new media literacy. And it didn't make sense to do just a printed book without embracing the new media and without really sharing a wealth of video production my team had made for teachers to use in their classrooms. So here we have the book, the printed book, and on Scalar we now have a variety of supporting materials, including parts of a new platform my team's been working on that will allow teachers to share lesson plans and multimedia materials with each other fairly easily and ways that can be remixed. We sort of picture it as Scratch for culture, and that's very much the vision we have. So now I'm beginning a new book project on comics and graphic novels. And for this book project, I'm going all digital because to represent graphic novels, which are already visually dense and complex, that require color, require shifts in scale, and in this case, I want to talk about them in relation to moving images, I need all of those capacities for this book. And so the vision is it'll be 9 essays, each published separately and serially, and at the end of that process, we'll bundle them together into one package, because I think the frame of the book allows certain things to happen. But in this case, it will never be a printed book. It will only be a digital product, but a digital product that unfolds much like the monthly floppies adding into a graphic novel at the end of the process. So those are some of the decisions I'm making as I think about my own work. When do we put something in print and when do we not? And I throw it open to the two of you to share some of your thoughts on that issue.
You want to go first?
Yeah, sure. That was fascinating. I, among other things, write science fiction novels, and some of them are aimed at young people. And I grew up on all kinds of literature for young people, some of which wasn't necessarily intended for them, but was very inspirational to me. And a lot of it revolved around giving you specific facts, right? Whether that was an Encyclopedia Brown story where at the end you learn something, or the Steal This Book by Abby Hoffman, where it's all like tricks that you can use to kind of reconfigure reality, or any of those other books that were all about facts. And back then, facts were expensive. Like discovering how to make a phone call for free from a payphone was something you needed to go find someone who knew how to do it. There wasn't a ready place that you could do it. And I think like today, all of those facts are available. They're on the network. Any fact that you want to know is on the network. And what you need in order to do pedagogy through literature is keywords. You need to know what's possible so you know what to search for. And having searched for it, it then kind of, you have it all unfolding in front of you. You also need some literacy about how to parse out the search results and understand which ones to pay attention to and which ones are rubbish. But I feel like now you can write a novel in which you just drop unfamiliar concepts on readers that have an implied, just Google it, attached to them. And that you can assume that the reader always has a search box kind of at arm's length when she's reading the book. And to me, that's at least the first inkling of what a 21st century novel might look like, a novel that always assumes a search engine. In the same way that, like, we used to have a lot of worry in math about pocket calculators, and there was this concern that kids might lose their ability to do simple sums in their head or to do long division, ignoring the fact that, grown-ups never did long division either, and that there was no future in which pocket calculators ceased to became less ubiquitous, unless it was a future in which doing simple sums was less important than poking through the rubble of civilization looking for canned goods with a long pole. So now I think good contemporary math education, not stuff that's driven by like No Child Left Behind standardized tests, but good contemporary math education is all about teaching concepts on the assumption that there's a calculator handy, in the same way that I think good literature will be all about dropping concepts in the assumption that a search engine is there for however deep you want to go on it. And that may not be the actual fully realized 21st century book, but it's the first inkling. In the same way that, like, when we started making movies that weren't just stage plays with a camera aimed at them, they weren't movies as we understand them today. They weren't things that could only exist on a screen, but they were close to it. They were more like movies than they were like plays.
Yeah, I think, I also, just as a bit of editorial, the Twitter address that was up before, that's not me.
I was like, who is that?
I know, who is that poor guy or gal? Because they're going to get a lot of weird tweets about, who's this guy? I'm at Intel Futurist. Just, that's me. Don't, that other person, I feel sorry for them. So there's two things for me. And like you, Henry, I'm glad that you mentioned that. With the Vintage Tomorrow's book that we're doing with O'Reilly, we had the same thing, where we were writing about steampunk and writing about the future and Maker and hackers, and it was just too long. I mean, physically we couldn't print how big it would be, and it was very new for me. There it is, thank you. It was new for me and for my co-author, James H. Carrott, to say, well, let's just make another book, but let's just make it digital. And it was, for us, it was so, well, of course, why wouldn't you do that? Let's just go make another book, and we'll just put it out and make it an ebook and have people be able to use it. And for us, it was this great sort of flowering, where we were like, oh, we can now do all this other stuff. We've got the Vintage Tomorrow's book, and that's sort of done, and that narrative and story is done. But now we get a chance to even expand on that narrative and do more, which was, just as an author, was amazing, and to be able to get that story up. But then as the publisher for O'Reilly, like, well, yeah, of course, just go do that. So that was great. We have this thing that we're doing at Intel called the Tomorrow Project, which I want to talk a bit about, because this is sort of it comes very much out of the work of what you've been doing, Henry, saying, how can we have these conversations about the future? So getting people involved in conversations about the future, that's our goal, is just get as many people to have conversations as possible. And how we do that is through published written science fiction, through podcasts, through published nonfiction, through videos. We go to conferences. It's really anywhere and everywhere. And we really do subscribe to kind of Cory's idea and Cory's metaphor of the dandelion, right? The idea is that you need to go everywhere. And my team, when they come to me and we talk about this, we've been doing the Tomorrow Project for about 4 years now, and we've done it in the US, we've done it in the UK, we just launched it in Brazil. And they come to me and they say, should we do it on this platform? Should we make an ebook of it? Should we do a podcast of this story? And they hate it because my answer is always yes. Should we do this? Yes. Should we do this? Yes. Should we go to this conference and give away lots of free books? Yes. Should we? And so now they even know, and I think that's that same type of freedom, that in this world where you've got all these devices, and you're creating connections between those devices, which I think is so powerful about what you're saying, Cory, is that you can move from a video to a nonfiction piece, to a fiction piece, and you create a much broader narrative and experience for the reader.
Yeah, we in fact have a picture of the dandelion on the cover of the Spreadable Media book, and inspired by Cory's statement, which I'm hoping you'll elaborate on once we get through talking about it. But convergent, the Spreadable Media starts with this premise that we're in a world of two ways of content travels through the culture. One is distribution. We know that very, very well. That's the system we've lived under in the age of mass media. It's top-down, it's corporately controlled, it's carefully timed and rolled out. But the other is circulation, which is a messy business. It's emergent. It's often bottom-up, and it's often shaped by unauthorized acts, right? And I'm carefully using this term unauthorized to separate us out from the word piracy, which we automatically turn to, and it shortcuts questions about value and meaning that may, in fact, the act of unauthorized circulation may increase value for the original rights holder. They lose control, but they gain cultural currency through that process. So the book begins with the Susan Boyle story. Automatically has now been surpassed by the Cooney 2012 story, and now we can say it's bypassed by Gangnam Style, all three of which are examples of content that spread well beyond the original intended audience and reached massive levels of circulation that completely swamped broadcast or distribution as we've traditionally understood it. So Cooney 2012's distributors have anticipated 500,000 viewers over a 2-month period of time. Instead, they got 77 million viewers in 4 days' time. Now, that's a scale that print, publishing, or broadcasting, that's a scale error that no one in traditional media would ever have made before. But it's also a scale that suggests grassroots circulation is rapidly going to surpass traditional forms of distribution in really spectacular ways. To put that into perspective, highest rated show on American television over that period of time, about 20 million viewers. The highest rated film in the box office that weekend, Hunger Games, another 20 million more or less. So you can add the highest grossing TV show and the highest grossing film and still get nowhere near the number of people who saw a 30-minute documentary on human rights from a small nonprofit in San Diego, right? And if we track the traffic there, we see the dominant circuits of spreading there start in middle-sized towns in the middle of the country. This was something created by Birmingham and Noblesville and Indianapolis, not something created by Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, New York, or Atlanta even, this sort of Turner Empire. So this is changing the way we think about how content travels, and every media is going to have to think differently about this world of circulation.
Yeah, I mean, to elaborate on this dandelion thing, when my daughter was born 5 years ago, just 5 years ago last week, and incidentally, I called London last night where I live, and my wife put my daughter on the phone, and she started carrying the phone and running around the flat screaming, "Hey, sexy lady, whoop, whoop, Gangnam Style." So that's how far it spread, 5-year-olds in London. When she was born, it occurred to me that as mammals, we're very invested in our reproductive strategy, right? That the result of our reproduction is something that we've invested a lot of energy into and whose destiny we want to be very sure of. I mean, this became sort of biochemically clear to me as soon as I realized I was having nightmares about the kid falling out of the crib and, carrying her around like she was made of china and so on. And I realized that this is very different from the reproductive strategy that I'd been thinking about for my other progeny, my intellectual progeny, the work that I do in terms of fiction that I've been allowing to circulate freely on the internet. And someone asked me about it, and I said, I feel like we need to replace our mammalian intuition with dandelion intuition, that when reproductive strategies are very, very cheap, you can transition from a thing where you want to make sure that every copy goes somewhere and does something good and germinates, right? So I want to make sure that my daughter has a good life. Dandelions are pretty callous about their progeny. They don't care if every seed germinates. What they want to know is that every crack in the sidewalk has a dandelion growing out of it, right? They want to be sure. So from my perspective, when I allow my works to circulate freely, my goal is not to make sure that everybody who reads one of my books pays me for it, but rather that everybody who's in the market to pay a writer for a book has a chance to read it. And that, I think, is easy for some people to understand in this era, and figuring out how to make media so that it transitions more smoothly instead of the other way around is very important.
And one of the things, to riff off of that a little bit, which actually ties to what both Henry and Cory do, one of the things that I've been fascinated with when it comes to distribution, so we have this ability to get those stories out there, to get those communications, those narratives out there, whether they be fiction or nonfiction. But one of the things I've been fascinated by is that the type of stories that we're talking about and the narratives that we're talking about also talk back. And I think this is something that I have found really, really fascinating, certainly with the Tomorrow Project, in the goal being having conversations. Again, the goal being not to have somebody pay for it, and we actually give everything away for free with the Tomorrow Project. But the goal is to actually then have people start talking back to us to say, do you like this future? Does this future scare the heck out of you? And then if it does, like if you're scared about synthetic biology or something that's going on, tell us, and then we'll go get a synthetic biologist and have them talk about what you're frightened about. And that's one of the things really that I was also struck with when we were doing this steampunk research in Vintage Tomorrows, and it's something that Henry's written about for years, is that in different cultures, in subcultures like in beatniks or hippies, if a beatnik, you wanted to be a beatnik, you had to go to New York City, or if you wanted to be a hippie, you had to go to Haight-Ashbury. But if you wanted to be a steampunk, you just go online.
Or to Portland.
Or to Portland. Portland! I'm from Portland. Yeah, there we go. And that is really different because embedded in steampunk is its ability to talk back, is the ability to individualize and be heard, which I think is so important to the dandelion metaphor and this idea of spreadable media, that's a good thing. You actually want people to tell you that what you're doing is interesting or what you're doing sucks, but that's good because the level of engagement is not only something that I think is good for distribution and good for business, but it's really, really good for broadening out that conversation and what people are able to do. And people expect it. And I think it's only going to happen more that literally baked into this cultural phenomenon of steampunk is the ability to personalize, is the ability to say, this is who I am and this is what I think.
Can I elaborate on that?
Please.
So apropos of that and what you were saying before about piracy and value, this kind of strategy, I think, only works when reproduction is so cheap as to be indistinguishable from free, right? If there's even a small amount of cost associated with putting a copy into each of those viral hands, then you need to get so many, because your conversion rate's going to be really low, right? It's going to be of the 1,000 people or 2,000 people who get it for free, one of them gives you money. So it only makes sense if the cost of getting it to those thousands of people is zero or so close as makes no damn. And that's why I think having fluid, cheap distribution systems on the internet makes so much sense, and why I get so freaked out, for example, when I hear about, what's the big deal if YouTube has to spend a penny a video making sure that there's nothing infringing in it, is because multiplied by all the people who might want to use that as a platform for spreading it, those pennies add up to something that would swamp the profits, the expected return from it, and it ceases to make that strategy a viable one. It's also why I freak out about Facebook saying, oh, we'll charge you whatever it is, $100 to reach 1,000 people who have already said that they like you and want to hear from you, and we'll charge you a tariff for that to know that your work is spread there, because chances are they're going to ignore it, right? So it has to be nearly free in order to get the net cast widely enough to get the return where someone spreads it or gives you money back for it.
To step in as sort of my futurist hat on, and this is only going to increase. So we were talking about distribution, and as you heard me, I said earlier that you're going to be able to turn anything into a computer, and I live much of my life 10 to 15 years in the future. My family jokes that I live in the future and commute home on the weekends. But so for what I'm seeing, though, is that this distribution and this is only going to increase. The amount of devices, the amount of being able to get to these devices, but also people's cars and in their homes and into buildings, and that distribution, that is only going to get bigger. So I think sort of changing how we think about it is incredibly important.
So you said at the beginning, Brian, that the stories we tell ourselves about the future shape who we are and how we think. So one of the stories we tell ourselves about this world of circulation is the viral media story, which is one of the ones that we tackle in the book. it's, you know, the idea, which is really a smallpox-infected blanket theory of media circulation, right? That we infect someone, they carry it back to the village, they infect their friends and family, and they have very little control over the process.
Yeah, thank you, Malcolm Gladwell, right?
You know, it's been associated with irrationality, susceptibility, vulnerability, and it results in us two scenarios. One is the shrug, I don't know what happened, it just went viral. And the other is the occult. My firm will tell you how to make your content go viral if you give us a large amount of money. And both of those short-circuit the question of asking why do people circulate your content and what kinds of meaningful engagements they go to. Interestingly, the idea of viral media, it's certainly there are media theorists, Douglas Rushkoff, among others, who are accountable for it, but actually it begins first in science fiction, right? And we could go back to Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash. Well, we actually could go back further, and Cordwainer Smith in the 1950s talks about ideas as germs that infect people and so forth.
We're getting nerdy now.
Yeah, we are.
We're getting nerdy.
Right, but I sort of wanted us to think about what are the good ideas and bad ideas about this space that come out of our beloved science fiction genre, which all three of us owe some pretty deep allegiances to. Science fiction itself was built as a genre to talk about ideas, right? And to encourage debate, going back to Hugo Gernsback, trying to use science fiction as a kind of popular science education, which assumed a fan elite that was going to ask questions about the relationship of fiction to reality. So what have you seen in science fiction lately that may speak to the kinds of issues we're concerned with? Or what have you done in your own work lately, Cory, that might speak to this?
Well, I find myself consciously creating science fiction that's meant to be not about predicting the future, but about predicting the present. To take some technology that's ubiquitous and very hard, its effect is so diffuse that it's very hard to figure out what's actually happening to any one of us as a result of it, you know, networks or devices or whatever. And then I try to build like a contrafactual world where that's the totalizing force. Not because I think that in the future, you know, cars or a certain kind of shoe or a certain kind of fork will be the thing that changes, the sole force that changes the future, but for the same reason that the doctor swabs the back of your throat and puts it in a petri dish and leaves it over the weekend so she can build an artificial world in which the one totalizing fact is whatever is germinating in your throat. And then you can, from that artificial world, deduce something about the real world.
So we're looking at a blinking red light, Brian, but can you give a quick answer, and then we'll...
I'll give two, and I'll actually, because I don't agree with Cory. Cory always says that about his work, and I firmly disagree with what he says, because we like to fight. Because I think that the future is not an accident, right? The future is not this sort of thing that's like, ooh, it just happened. No, the future just doesn't happen. And one of the things why I'm a big fan of Cory and why we've been collaborating for so long is Cory has an opinion. Like, Cory has an opinion about the future and where things he can go. He's an activist and always says
my wife will affirm this. That I have
strongly held opinions. Yeah. And you use your fiction and your nonfiction as a platform for your activism, to create that world. And I think all good science fiction, to take it back, every good science fiction author throughout has always had an opinion. That I think science fiction is beautiful, and I'm geeky and I love it, but science fiction with intent, the intent of having a point of view, that actually can have a huge effect, and I think that's what you do, and there's a long history, and that's where I always look for. I look for science fiction authors who have strongly held opinions and use their science fiction to do that. I may not always agree with them, but I think that's where the good stuff happens.
Well, we have just gotten started, and we need to end, so the three geeks coming soon to an opera house near you.
Thanks,
everybody.